I'm almost certain that isn't the biography I provided, but I think I know who may have. All right, I'm going to talk about the code of practice, and I got to tell you, I'm already really distracted because the AV guy was explaining the remote control to me, and he told me there's one button that you don't push. But I can't remember which one, and he didn't really say what was going to happen. So I'm really tempted. But anyway, we'll see how this goes. I'm going to talk about the code of practice. Canada's beef industry has had a code of practice for a long time. First one came out in 1991, and then we renewed it in 2013. And there's been some pretty considerable changes, both in society and industry and in the code between now and then. So one of the things that I wasn't supposed to touch that one. One of the things that really changed, and this is what I'm going to be focusing on, is there's a lot more knowledge and discussion around pain now than there ever used to be. So back in 1991, when they put the first code together, that first code talked about pain 9 times, talked about castration twice, and horns and dehorning 4 times. In the new code, talks about pain 29 times, it mentions castration 31 times, and mentions dehorning 31 times. So I wasn't involved in this process to any extent, but from what I've heard, the discussions around pain and castration and dehorning were probably the most contentious, had the most discussion of this whole thing. So that's why I'm going to be focusing on those 2 issues. Now that said, there's a lot of information in the code that covers an awful lot of stuff besides dehorning and castration, and everybody should familiarize themselves with this thing, but I'm going to just focus on these 2. So pain and pain control. One thing I can tell you is that opinions on these issues vary considerably. They vary from those who think that, well, you know what, this doesn't really hurt them all that much, to, well, why do we suddenly need to use pain drugs now? We never needed to use them before. Some people think the pain drugs don't help, and some say, well, who's asking for this? And what are they willing to pay me to do this? And some say it's, you know what, it's maybe time, it's the right thing to do. And I know there's probably more opinions in this, but I know that these ones exist because I've gone through all of them myself. So how come there's so much more discussion about this now? Well, some of it is because everybody knows there's a lot more discussion out there about how food is produced and why it's produced the way it is. We know an awful lot more now about animal welfare and pain control than we ever used to. And that knowledge comes from research. So I work for the Beef Cattle Research Council. I'm one of 3 people that work for the Beef Cattle Research Council. I'm the science guy. Andrea Brockelbank is here, I think, and she's the executive director. Tracy Herbert is the extension coordinator, so all the stuff you hear about research that's coming from us is coming from her. So there's 3 of us. And our mandate as a council is to support research that'll contribute to the competitiveness and sustainability of Canada's beef cattle industry. Now, there's 3 staff, but we are given direction by producers. So all of the funding decisions that are made by the council about what research to support, what directions to go in, that sort of thing, those are all made by producers. Those producers represent British Columbia, I think this is the pointer, Alberta, Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan has 3 reps, so Tim Alexon, Ryan Beyerbach, and Mike Spratt are your 3 Saskatchewan reps. Karen Clark's here from Ontario today. Matt Bowman's here from Ontario. We also have an Atlantic Canada rep. So a number of these representatives are here because we had a research council meeting here yesterday. So anyway, these are the guys that make the decisions around where the dollars go, and we're funded by the national checkoff. So one of the things that we've seen over the years is that industry support for research has gone up. So back in 2008 is when this really started. About 6 cents of the national checkoff dollar was going to research, and that's gradually increased over time. And at this point, I think we're close to about 18 cents of the national checkoff dollars going towards research. And so what that means is that we've got more dollars available to us for research now, and that means we can do more stuff. And so we've always focused on research around food safety, beef quality, feed efficiency, forage, grassland productivity, animal health, because those are things that really contribute to industry's bottom line. We've always been active in those areas. With more dollars, we can do more in those areas, but we can also do more things. And so we're getting much more involved in research around the environment, and you're going to hear a really great presentation about some new results on an environment project we did. Not from me, you're going to hear it from the guy who actually did it. That's later today. You always save the exciting stuff for the end, right? And it's also allowed us to get into animal welfare research. Now, those things like welfare and environment, those would be considered public good research because it benefits all of society. It doesn't just benefit industry. And the long-time argument was that, well, if it's benefiting society, then society should pay for it. The government should fund that kind of stuff. And that's the way we approached it too. So these are things like animal welfare, antimicrobial resistance, environmental stuff. But what's become increasingly apparent is that there's also groups out there that are trying to form public opinion on these issues and inform public policy and inform government regulation on these sorts of things. And those policies and regulations can very much impact our industry. And so that's pretty evident in things like animal welfare, right? There's groups that are calling for much more draconian transport regulations. There's groups that are calling for huge restrictions on antimicrobial use. And you know, we're regularly getting bombarded about bad stories about beef and the environment. So it's really important that industry be involved in these things too, not so that we get the answers we want, but so that we get the answers that we need that'll you know, contribute to really sound science-based industry policy and potentially regulation if it gets to that point. So back to the code. 1991 code talked about castration, dehorning, and what they said was that, well, if you're doing these things, you should use the right equipment, you should know what you're doing, you should maintain them well, and follow proper techniques. Do it as early as you can, preferably before weaning, because it sets them back less. Do what you can to avoid pain. If you're doing this in older animals, talk to a veterinarian. The new code actually says the same things. Says when you're dehorning here, make sure you know what you're doing, use the right equipment, use the well-maintained equipment, use the right techniques, talk to veterinarians about how to do it right. Do it as early as you can, preferably when the horn hasn't attached yet. What's new here is that there's a requirement as of 3 weeks ago, a requirement to use pain control if you're dehorning calves after the horn bud has attached to the skull. Same thing with castration. It says the same thing as before, do it early, do it right, use the right equipment, keep it well maintained, you know, make sure people who are doing it know what they're doing. Castrate calves as young as you can, but as of 3 weeks ago, if you're castrating bulls older than 9 months of age, use pain control. Talk to your veterinarian, use pain control. And 2 years from now, that goes from 9 months to 6 months. So they agree. The best thing you can do is to castrate and dehorn when calves are really young, when they're small, when the operation is less invasive and it's less painful. There's evidence to that effect. So if you as a producer are already castrating and dehorning really early in life, you're fine. This change in the code isn't going to impact you. If you're not castrating or dehorning early, now would be a really good time to start, if you can. So there's always been good economic reasons to do these things. I don't need to tell you what they are. There's also valid welfare reasons to castrate and dehorn cattle. Economic reasons, there's also benefits for the animals, right? They don't fight as much, they don't hurt each other as much, there's less stress. Don't, you know, breed heifers with the wrong bulls, that sort of thing. So there's a bit of an irony, right? That there are long-term animal welfare benefits to doing these things, but the focus now is on that one really bad day that those calves have early in life or when they get to the feedlot. That intense pain at that point is what the focus is. So I think it's important to point out what some other groups are saying about dehorning and castration. So if you were just the average consumer, And you had questions around farms, farm animal welfare in Canada. You might Google it, and there's information out there. First thing that comes up is National Farmed Animal Care Council, and that sounds pretty official. They're the ones who developed and led the whole code development process. And NFAC, I don't know what that sounds for, but okay, well, here's one about humane food. Let's see what the Canadian Coalition for Farm Animals says. So we can go to their website, and well, there's a pretty good group here. They're dedicated to promoting the welfare of farm animals in Canada. And there's a lot of ways they want to do that. Public education, stronger laws to protect those animals, consumer choice. Who doesn't like these things, right? They got information on beef cattle. And, well, look, I can help them too. So how can I help them? I can help them by giving them money and by not eating meat. So it's important to know what groups like this are saying about what you do for a living. So they have opinions on dehorning. They say dehorning is extremely painful, especially when you're doing it in older animals. Once those horns are attached and develop and have nerve endings in there and all the rest of it. And that's true. We agree with that. It's often done by producers, not veterinarians. Well, that's true. And it's done without anesthetic. So they're starting to focus in on the fact that we're doing these painful things without anesthetic. Same thing about castration. Right? Castration hurts, and we're not doing anything about it. Think about being a vegan. So pain's on the agenda. Some of the things that we do to cattle do hurt. And this is attracting attention from groups that are telling people not to eat meat. Now, that isn't the reason why pain control got into the code of practice, but it is certainly a factor that raised the discussion. But the focus of the code was to make sure that the outcome of the code was to make the animals feel better, not the animal rights activists better. The focus was on the animals. So how do we know it hurts? That's a challenge because cows don't talk. But there are things you can measure. You can measure performance things around average daily gain, feed intake, that sort of thing. And then a lot of things that they can measure in a research environment. They can do blood samples for cortisol and all the rest of it. They can measure heart rates and brain waves and things. Lots of behavioral things that they measure, stride lengths, how much they struggle in the chute, how many steps they take, how loud they bellow, all these sorts of things. So, of course, it's fairly evident there's a lot of things we can measure, but not an awful lot you can do on the farm, right? They're not really practical, and they're a lot of work. In terms of pain drugs, there's a lot more options available now than there were in 1991. We were talking mainly about two classes of drugs. There's anesthetics, and those are drugs that completely kill all sensation. So if you go to the dentist and they stick a needle in your gum and then you're drooling and slurring and slobbering for the next 4 hours, that's an anesthetic. So it's something like lidocaine. And then there's analgesics, and those don't kill all feeling, but they will selectively reduce pain and inflammation. Those are often non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. And there's a couple of them out there. There's ketoprofen, Anafen is one of them, flunixin or Banamine is one of them, and meloxicam or Metacam is one of them. So they vary in terms of how you deliver them. They vary in terms of how long the effect is. And there's both brand names and generics of both of them. So when it comes to dehorning, we know dehorning hurts, and we know that dehorning hurts an awful lot more once that horn's attached to the skull. And we know that dehorning can obviously be avoided by genetics. So here's what we're talking about. So this is a picture of half a calf. It's looking at you, so the ear's off to the one side. You can see the horn bud there. So if you're taking that off early in life, that horn bud's just kind of floating there on the skin, right? So you're really just cutting skin to get that off. But once you wait past 2 or 3 months of age, that horn bud attaches to the skull. You get nerves in there, you get blood flow, and you get hard bone, and taking it off at that point hurts an awful lot more. So it probably hurts to begin with, even with disbudding, but if you wait until it's a hard horn, it hurts that much. So there's a really obvious break point about where pain moves from a nice thing to do to a really important thing to do. Now, fortunately with dehorning, Giving pain control for dehorning is a relatively easy thing to do. There's a kind of a ridge that runs from the corner of the eye up to the base of the horn, and if you drop some of that anesthetic in there, like right in the middle, it doesn't take more than a minute or two before the ear gets all floppy, and it really gets rid of the sensation. So I was asked to give reference to industry practice in this. So back in 97, 98, there was a big survey done in Alberta, cow-calf survey, about various production practices. And they asked people, how many of your cattle are polled, when do you dehorn them to use pain control? And what they said was, well, about half the people were about 80% were dehorning, half of them were dehorning around birth. There wasn't even any questions around pain control. It wasn't even a conversation then. If you look at the most recent cow-calf survey that Western Beef Development led this past year, see a couple of things. Fewer people are dehorning, maybe a few less are dehorning around birth, and there's probably around 20% of them that are getting dehorned at weaning or later. And so at that point, we definitely have the horn attached. So 9% of people are saying that they use pain control. I've lost my pointer. 9% are saying they're using pain control. There's probably at least 20% that are dehorning later than they should. So pain control should be a real consideration for these people. But one other thing to point out is that these percentages are bigger, but it's affecting a lot fewer calves, right? Because back then there was only about 8% of herds said they, were mostly polled. Now it's close to 70% that say they're mostly polled. So there's a lot fewer calves getting affected. So that's awesome. So with horns, we have options, right? You can take them off before they attach, or you can leave them on, or you can breed them out. But with castration, it's a lot more challenging, right? Because probably 50% of the commercial calves that are running around are going to be castrated. And it's not quite as obvious with castration, right? With dehorning, we know that if you take them off when it's a hard horn, it hurts a lot more than if you're just taking buds off. With castration, it's more of just a general or slow increase in the level of pain, we think. We do know the older the animal, the bigger the surgery, the bigger the wound, the more it hurts, and the more animals get set back in terms of growth, so do it soon. But it's not really obvious at which point it would become more painful. Now there's a lot of research around this. I'm going to point out one of them because I think it's the most compelling one out there, and it was done here. It was done by Steve Hendrick, Joe Stuckey, and one of their grad students, Jan Kura. And what they did was they looked at 100 bull calves that were 2-3 months old, and they surgically castrated all of them in 3 groups. One was just castrated without drugs. One was given an anesthetic, to numb them, to kill all the pain. One group was given both the anesthetic as well as anti-inflammatory later on. And they measured all sorts of behavioral things. So did the drugs help? What have I got here? This is a graph of how many steps those calves took after they were castrated. And the group that was castrated without any pain drugs didn't take as many steps. So, the conclusion there is that they were less comfortable. It hurt more to move, so they didn't. You could see differences between these groups that were castrated with drugs, but it wasn't statistically significant. So there was some benefit in terms of their willingness to move around. What's this here? This is stride length. So this is how big the steps were that they were taking with their hind legs. And the other thing, so what you can see from here is that within the first 4 to 8 hours, when the pain is probably the most intense after castration, the group that got both pain drugs was taking bigger steps, so they were probably more comfortable. What's this one? Animals classified in pain. So they looked at them and said, this animal looks like it's pretty comfortable, or it's not. Animals that were castrated with, I can never find my pointer. Anyway, the point on the left-hand side, animals that were castrated without any pain control were more evidently in pain than ones that had both the pain control drugs. So, they do work. anesthetics, analgesics do work. They're not perfect, but they do help. And so, confidence that using these things isn't, just something to do for fun. There is some benefit for the animal. Now with band, that was surgical castration. The thing with surgical castration is it hurts, and it hurts for a while, but then it's done. Band castration's a bit different, right? Because it hurts when you put the band on, it hurts for a while, but then it hurts again 3 weeks later when that scrotum sloughs off. And the problem is that there's no pain drug available right now that'll give you a long enough pain relief to deal with that long-term pain. So that's a subject of future research. The other thing I wanted to point out was that this research was done on 2 to 3 month old calves. But what does our code say? Our code says that use pain control when you're castrating at 9 months. So why the difference? I think the difference is partly that, the difference is partly that compared to giving an anesthetic for dehorning, which is fairly easy and fairly quick, giving an anesthetic for castration is epidural, so up at the top of the tailhead. It's a lot harder to do that right, and it takes a lot longer for that drug to kick in. So it's about 10 minutes to get effect of the pain control drug there. So that's a bit long to be waiting in practical reality. Another approach is to give the anesthetic right in the scrotum, your vet can tell you, but in the scrotum, and that sounds really, really kicky. There's also, in some places, topical anesthetics that you can rub on, and apparently they work, but they're not available here. This is something that's available in Australia. It's not approved for use here, but it would be really cool to see, if it would work here. I think that would be worth looking into. So I think that's probably the main reason why the code looked at that age, right? Because if you're by 9 months of age, those cattle are in a feedlot. They've got the facilities to restrain them to actually castrate them right. So let's look at the survey. Back in 1997-98, about half of the people were castrating at birth, another 40% at branding. Most recent survey, a few more are doing it around birth, so 94% instead of, what have we got here? 92%, so it hasn't changed all that much. What is, I think, encouraging, if you squint at this just right, we got 3% of people that are castrating after weaning, and 4% are using pain control. So if those are the same people, then it's going right. And we got some other survey stuff going on to find out, whether the people that are using pain control are using this pain control on the older animals the way it's recommended. So. Anyway, I want to reiterate this point that if producers are, following recommendations, so castrating calves really early and making sure you're getting them both, then castration at the feedlot and using pain drugs shouldn't even be an issue. So the question is, of course, what's the welfare impact in really young calves? And we're funding some research on this project with Karen Schwarzkopf Genswein, who's at Ag Canada in Lethbridge, and Ed Pager, who's at the University of Calgary. And what they're looking at is how does age and the method of castration and the use of pain control or not affect welfare outcomes in calves, and they're measuring that whole raft of things that I mentioned earlier. And so potentially research from this project could help inform future revisions to the code. And I got an email as I was finishing this presentation up late last night that actually gave me some of the preliminary results, so I thought I'd tell you, but don't tell Karen, because it's a secret. And what her results are saying is that if you're castrating calves in the first week of life, whether you're using a band or surgical, they could not see any pain response in those calves compared to the calves that had nothing done to them at all. So that's you know, that's kind of reassuring, right? Because that's why we've always recommended to do it early, is that if you do it early, there's less of a pain effect, and that's what this is reassuring or reinforcing. But what it does say is that as they get older, you are seeing differences between the groups, especially when it's surgically castrated. So anyway, the next year of the trial, they're going to be looking at pain control drugs and whether there's a benefit to using those. So I'm quite looking forward to those results. Now, we've got a website. It's a really great website. It's beefresearch.ca, and we've got a whole section on pain control. A couple of weeks ago, or months ago now, we had Dr. John Campbell from the Vet College do a webinar for us on pain control, practical and effective methods of pain control in beef cattle. So if you're interested in learning more, I would really recommend that you go here and watch that webinar, because it's archived, and it's really quite informative. And I got another video to show you in a couple of minutes. Got a few slides between here and there, but I do want to bring it back to this social license issue. In Canada's farmers and ranchers, you have great stories to tell, and you're really proud to tell them. And you see that in things like ag more than ever, people showing pride in the way they do things. And that extends to animal welfare too. We got some really, really good animal welfare stories about how much producers care for their animals. But some of these animal welfare stories aren't nearly as easy to explain. And they're hard to tell, but there are people out there telling these stories. And here's a couple of them. Here's Carrie Underwood, who's a country singer, who became a vegetarian after seeing her parents castrate calves. And there's Ryan Gosling, who's a Canadian actor, who was deploring the barbaric cultural practice of dehorning calves. So there's people out there telling this story about painful practices in cattle production. And they both have, these are two of them, and they both have really big microphones. So there's people out there telling that story, and it's important that we have a good story to tell too. So we got a video that we made about pain control, and hopefully, I've never showed a video before, and I've never seen a presentation where people trying to show a video hasn't failed. So anyway, hopefully this one will work. And it's on May if it doesn't, so you can make it go now.
I'm a second-generation beef farmer. I'm owner and manager of Colt Farms Limited in southern Alberta. Pain mitigation in beef production has become a hotter topic. One of the things that we are adopting now is things like, how does the animal feel? We feel better if we're not in stress or pain. We would feel the same thing about the cattle.
As consumers are becoming ever more aware of what they're eating and not only want to know where their food comes from, but how it was produced, and proper pain mitigation is a good way for the industry to address the concerns that consumers have about the industry and make them feel better about the products that they are consuming.
I think it's our moral obligation to take care of the animals that are directly under our care. We know cattle feel pain. We know that because when we give them analgesics or anesthetic, we can eliminate the pain responses. And some of those things include behavioral responses, physiological responses.
I think now that we've accepted some of the things that our animals have to undergo are painful, it's just logical that the next step would be that we do something about it, and pain mitigation is part of that. The incentives to the producer to use pain mitigating drugs are very simple. You'll be able to do your procedure much quicker and much more effective.
The code of practice was developed by industry, but it was developed by industry in conjunction with veterinarians, with researchers, with some food industry people, with animal welfare groups like humane societies, all involved in this. The Beef Code of Practice has a couple of things about pain. It tells us branding and castration and dehorning are all relatively routine things that do cause pain. For these painful procedures, one of the best things you can do to reduce pain is to do it as soon as possible. Do it in young animals because the wound is smaller, they recover faster, and it probably hurts less.
There was a lot of talk in the industry about pain mitigation and an increased drive towards mandating it. We wanted to get ahead of the ball a little bit and start to become familiar with it before it's mandated. Douglas Lake Ranch has a long history in the Nicola Valley between here and our other operation up at Williams Lake. We run approximately 9,000 mother cows between the two places. Since 2014, we've used a product called Medicam on all our calves at branding. Calves at branding are generally between 3 and 6 weeks of age. And during the process, we also castrate and dehorn. And the upside for us is that we have noticed a quicker return to feed and just an overall improved well-being of the calf after the procedure. It's a fairly streamlined process. We already give 3 shots. One more shot wasn't a significant time factor there for us. It's only a couple seconds more to administer the Medicam.
Producers report that calves that have been medicated for pain will follow mother, they will suckle more, and they will travel easier.
It's best to do castrations as early as possible because the tissue area is much smaller and the blood supply is less developed, and we believe that the innervation of that area is less developed.
What the Code of Practice is that in January 1st of 2016, if you're castrating a bull that's 9 months of age or older, you need to talk to your veterinarian and use the pain control that your veterinarian tells you to use. 2 years after that, January 1st, 2018, that goes from 9 months of age to 6 months.
I would really encourage that we castrate these calves at a young age. The worst thing we see here is ranchers that have taken and left one nut in. Don't do that. That is the most painful procedure. That one costs us the most grief here, honestly, of anything.
If you're conducting painful procedures on animals that are approaching 850 pounds, there is an element of danger. If you mitigate that pain, you would theoretically prevent or minimize injury to the person doing the procedure.
Dehorning is particularly painful once the horn attaches to the skull. So when a calf is born, if it has horns, the horn's actually loose, it wobbles, it's not directly connected to the skull. But probably around 2 to 3 months of age, that horn does get connected by a bone, and at that point, taking that horn off hurts an awful lot more. And so there's a requirement in the Code of Practice that as of January 1st, 2016, if you're dehorning after 2 or 3 months of age, after that horn is attached, you need to use pain control.
One thing we do about avoiding having to dehorn is our buying procedure. We really try to avoid buying animals that have really aggressive sharp horns. However, if we ever got an animal that had extreme horns that would actually start causing pain and suffering to other animals, then we would use pain mitigation to reduce the size of the horn. But we won't take the horn off at the base, we'll stub it so it's no longer pointy.
Research on painful procedures is really hard research to do. Cattle are a prey species. They get eaten by other animals, and so millions of years of evolution have taught them to be stoic, to not show pain. Because if you watch the National Geographic specials, what you learn is that the lions eat the young ones and the old ones and the sick ones and the hurt ones. They're the easiest to catch. And so you can't necessarily hide that you're old or young, but what you can do is try to pretend you're not sick or in pain. And so it's only recently that we've got the expertise who can help us with that sort of thing.
The reason that we've moved this way is not primarily financial. Yes, it costs money, but we'd like to look at the bigger picture of what we're doing. It's not, geez, how many dollars it's going to cost. It's like, Is the animal going to be more comfortable? If the animal's more comfortable, my staff feel better about what they're doing because they don't see the cattle in pain, and the animal feels better. I think it's a win-win for all of us.
I think it's important that producers get ahead of the curve and not wait for things to be mandated to them. It would be better for the industry if producers were to voluntarily move in the direction that consumers want. I think in the end that'll improve the sellability of our product.
We like to view our whole operation and say, let's not just do one magical thing right. We focus on doing 100 little things correctly. All these things tie into more of a mentality and approach to our business, which says we care about our people, we care about our environment, and we care about our animals.
So I'm done. I would encourage you to go again to beefresearch.ca. We got a ton of good stuff on there. Every project that we're funding through the beef science cluster is on there. We got a lot of good resources, not just describing the research that's going on, but a lot of producer tools, not just around pain, but around cost of production, forage, all sorts of things. So take a look at that, and yeah, there's lots of ways to get a hold of us. And if you got questions, I could try to entertain them.